Hello, I'm Gill at engVid, and today we have a lesson on the word big and the use of the word big in idioms and expressions in English. Okay, so we have quite a lot here to look through. So let's start at the top. And a big fish. So it could be literally just a big fish that you see swimming in the water, but this is a kind of metaphor that's used for a person. If they're working in an organisation, they're high up and very important, you could say he's a big fish in that company, or she's a big fish in that company. Okay, and similarly, a big noise is used in the same way. Maybe it sounds like, they're very dominant as a person. You hear them speaking a lot, but he's a big noise in that organisation. It can sound a bit sarcastic as well, that kind of expression. And also a big shot is a similar thing again. So he's such a big shot there. Oh, she's a big shot in that company. Again, it sounds a bit sarcastic, depending on how the person says it. Okay, and a big name, well, that can be a bit more neutral, really. Somebody might be a big name in the film industry, for example, and they are just, a name that is heard a lot. They're quite famous, so they're a big name. Okay. So with all that kind of person, you sometimes say, oh, that person has got a big head, or they are a big head. If it's written as one word, it's the noun. And, oh, she's such a big head, or he's such a big head. But they have a big head. It can also be used as separate words, adjective and noun, meaning they are very, they think a lot of themselves. They feel very important. So they're not very modest. In other words, they're the opposite of modest. Okay. And then if they're a big mouth, maybe as well as being a big head, they might be a big mouth, meaning they talk a lot. And they like to hear people say, oh, he likes the sound of his own voice. People who like to talk a lot, they like to hear themselves talking. So a big mouth, someone who talks a lot, very confidently, maybe a bit too confident, a bit egotistical. Okay. And then if somebody is getting too big for their boots, if you say to someone, be careful, you're getting too big for your boots, it means they're thinking a bit too much of themselves, becoming very sort of self-centered, egotistical, and so on. It may be that they're being a little bit bossy. They're telling people what to do all the time. You're getting too big for your boots. Just, cut it down a bit. When people start to tell other people what to do, becoming, authoritarian like that, or bossy. So there is an expression as well, bossy boots, bossy boots. Often these expressions, they have a repeated letter, alliteration, big and boots, and bossy boots. It helps, it's part of the style of the language. Okay. So then moving on, if something is a big ask, usually ask is a verb, to ask. And I ask, you ask, we ask. But this has been turned into a noun here. It's a big ask, meaning a big request, really. Somebody is asking you to do something that's going to be quite difficult. So you might say, oh, that's a big ask. I don't know if that's going to be possible. Or it might be a challenge. Oh, that's a big ask. I'll have to see. It may be possible. I'll try. It's a challenge. So that's a big ask. Something could be a big deal. You could say that's a big deal. That's really, there's a lot connected to that. It's really important. But then you can say, oh, that's no big deal. That's not very important. So it can work both ways, that one, a big deal. It could be just a situation that you're in. It might be serious, so that would be a big deal. But it may not be serious. You think, oh, well, we can easily solve this issue. It's no big deal. We can soon sort this out. So it's to do with a situation, really. Okay. The big picture, that's when some people, the way they look at things, they look at little details. And that's the opposite of the big picture. If you look at the big picture, or the bigger picture, to use the comparative, the bigger picture, that's like an overview of a whole situation. So some people like to look at little details, and that's important, but other people like to look at the overall image of it, the big picture. So it's good to try to do both, really, to get the right balance and perspective. Okay, so if somebody says, or they hit the big time, or they've reached the big time, that means in their career, it may be an actor or a singer, and they've been trying for years to make progress and to get better and better jobs. And then suddenly there's a big breakthrough, and they're in a really important place, like a big performance space with thousands of people in the audience, and they're earning a large amount of money, and they've made the big time, or they've reached the big time. So that's that, meaning that they've really progressed well in their career. This is the big time. And when you've got that opportunity, you might say, this is my big moment now. Stepping onto that stage now is my big moment. But you do hope that you'll have more big moments to follow, and that it won't be the one and only big moment in your career. Okay. So, moving on to the second column, Big Brother. I don't know if you know this term with capital B, Big Brother. It comes from a novel written by an English novelist called George Orwell, and the novel is called 1984, which is the year, but he actually wrote the novel in 1948. So what he did, he reversed 48 and made it 84. And it's a kind of prediction of a very bad society where people are used like slaves, and they're brainwashed. It's a very controlling society. And Big Brother is the name of the person who appears on a screen controlling everybody and watching everybody. There's this phrase or sentence, Big Brother is watching you. So you're going around day to day, this person, Big Brother, is watching you all the time to make sure you don't do anything that goes against the rules. So big brother. And people use this term now if they feel that a society or a government is becoming too controlling, and they're monitoring what everybody's doing, maybe through their mobile phones nowadays. And people might say, oh, it's just like Big Brother. Big Brother's watching us all the time. If we've got our mobile phones on, they know where we are and everything. So, Big Brother. Okay. And the word brother, you'd think, oh, well, that's nice. That's a family name. But it's the opposite of being a sort of friendly family type of person. Okay. So then we have the Big Apple, which is a nickname for the city of New York. So the Big Apple. Okay. If someone says, I've got bigger fish to fry, it's when there's an issue, somebody's mentioned, oh, what are we going to do about this, this problem we have? And the other person isn't really very interested. They don't really care because they have more important things to think about. So they say, I have bigger fish to fry, meaning I have more important things to think about. But this is more metaphorical, more colourful. And again, we've got fish and fry, so there's the repeated consonant sound again, which is part of the style. Okay. So, if somebody says, oh, that's big of you, it sounds rather sarcastic. I don't think it's used to mean that's nice of you, that's very generous of you. It's when somebody's doing something for someone and they think it's nice of them, they think they're being generous, but the other person doesn't think so. So they say a bit sarcastically, oh, that's big of you, with maybe a facial expression as well and a certain tone of voice, meaning, oh, that's very generous of you, thank you. But they're not really, they're being sarcastic. Okay, good. And then to think big can be a good thing. If you think too small, you may not achieve very much in life. But if you think big, think of big challenging things you could do, and not to be afraid of it and just to keep working at it. It may be hard work and there may be a lot of detail. It could take some years, but if you think big, you can achieve something big, setting up a company, anything like that. So to think big is a positive thing usually. Okay. And then if you do think big and you're successful, you might make some big bucks. So bucks is a nickname for money, American dollars, really. Bucks are American dollars. But again, big bucks, we've got the repeated B. And if you think big and you're successful, you can make big bucks. You can make a lot of money. Okay. And then you might become the last of the big spenders. But again, this is often used in a sarcastic way, so that if somebody has spent a little bit of money, but not very generously, somebody else might say, oh, you're the last of the big spenders. But they mean it that you're not really spending very much. It's sarcastic. Okay. If someone says, what's the big idea? It's a kind of challenging question. What do you think you're doing? What's the big idea? Meaning there isn't really a big idea. What's the big idea? Why are you doing this? You might hear this often in, I think in American movies like gangster crime movies, somebody might say, what's the big idea? If it's a kind of conflict situation. Okay. The big smoke is a reference to any city. Going back, of course, hopefully with air pollution, we will get less and less air pollution if countries start to do something about it. But the big smoke used to mean a big city where there would be a lot of buildings, a lot of chimneys, either industrial or residential, with smoke coming out of the chimneys, a lot of factories producing smoke. So cities used to be very smoky, and I think in some countries they still are. So the big smoke, it's often when people are moving to a city from the countryside, and there's a big, or there would have been in the past in this country, a big difference between living in the countryside and then coming to somewhere like London or going to a big industrial city with factories and smoking chimneys. It would be literally the big smoke. Okay? And then to big up really just means to exaggerate something, to make something sound big, probably make it sound bigger than it really is. So it is really an exaggeration. But maybe if people are selling a product, they want to make it sound really good. They might exaggerate the product a little bit and make it sound better than it really is. So to big it up, big up. Okay, so I hope that's been a useful run through of some interesting idioms, all using the word big. So if you'd like to test your knowledge on this, there's a quiz on the website at engvid.com. So do go and give it a try and see how you do. And thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Okay, bye for now.